Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at a video from Extra Credits, which is a channel that I've watched for a few years off and on now. Like a lot of YouTube channels, I'll peek in every couple months or so, and I'll check out a video, see what's going on, drop out for a few months, and kind of just repeat the cycle. And, well, unfortunately this time around, it was for bad reason. They have dropped a very controversial video that has been brought to my attention, and the like to dislike ratio is very comparable to YouTube Rewind. It goes by the name of Stop Normalizing Nazis, which, you know, very controversial in the first place, very shocking title, very brutal title. Well, that's not the full title. The full title is Stop Normalizing Nazis, Socially Conscious Game Design, Extra Credits. That is the full title itself. Today, I will be responding to the video itself because there's a lot that I disagree with when it comes to this video, primarily because I feel like that this video not only paints the gaming community in a very negative light, but also really misses the point of most video games that contain Nazis, terrorists, you know, all these things. Now, with that being said, we're just gonna go ahead and jump right into it. We have a lot to talk about, so let's go ahead and just, I guess, dive right into it.
No one should ever have a random chance of fighting for the Nazis. And we should never express that there's no meaningful difference between Nazis and Allied soldiers, or that they're functionally interchangeable.
I mean, at the end of the day, I personally don't really care. I mean, I play a lot of these games. I played a lot of World War II games where you just kind of go in between the two, and it just never really mattered. In a lot of these games, there really wasn't any problem playing between the two. I mean, you could just use the weapons regardless of which side you were on. Like, if you were on the Nazi side, you could use any of the American weapons. You could use the M1 Garand. You could use the MP40 if you were on the Allied side. So I don't really see the big problem with it. But, I mean, if you see a huge problem with it, I don't really see why you're necessarily playing a game, you know, that kind of revolves around these topics in the first place. But, I mean, we do literally live in a time where people have no self-accountability, so if you do buy a game in which, you know, it's about World War II, I can only expect for people to be upset that they would then have to play the factions that were involved in World War II, so.
Oh, and on a similar note, let's please stop forcing people to play as terrorists as well. There you are, playing your modern shooter, and all of a sudden you're a terrorist. You didn't ask for this, you didn't choose this, and yet second verse, same as the first. There it is. I mean, that's literally the name of your side in the game. We can do better than this.
Ironically enough, you've shown a screenshot of Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and this is a game in which you are never forced to play as terrorists if you don't want to. Now, if you play in competitive, yes, you have to play on both sides at some point in the match. However, you can play in casual, and if you play in the casual playlist, you can just choose whichever side you want to play on. If that team's full, you can always just spectate the match, or you can leave and find a new one. So, hypothetically speaking, you can always just play as a counter-terrorist officer. I'm just wondering at this point if anyone at Extra Credits has actually ever played this game before. Or if they just did a quick Google search for the screenshot of the game and added it into the video. Yeah.
No one should have to put on the costume of an ideology they find abhorrent without actually opting into it in your game. And by making people do so, we get them to stop thinking about it, to stop thinking of the meaning behind these things. We normalize them. We make them just window dressing for entertainment. Those uniforms, those symbols, become things that no longer inherently revolt us. They reduce our visceral reaction to seeing the embodiment of these ideologies.
Now, I'm all for people being allowed to choose things in games. I mean, player choice is a great thing for video games, but is it really window shopping to play as the Nazis in a World War II themed shooter randomly? Or is this just the same worn out argument that old people have been using for decades now, re-wrapped over and over again? I mean, come on now, let's just be honest. I mean, you present this as if it's just because I play a few rounds of CSGO that I'm gonna become more and more desensitized to these terrorist attacks or something. It's almost like saying, well, I've been playing a whole lot of Madden recently. I really hope I don't get CTE in my mid-40s. Just because there's a clear and present threat in the real world, with something, that doesn't mean that seeing it in a video game is going to be an issue. Most people are not looking at the terrorists in CSGO and praising ISIS the next morning. This is almost the same argument as video game violence causes real-life violence. Realistically, all it is just a different name slapped on it with a few words changed around and just a little bit more politicization.
Those uniforms, those symbols, become things that no longer inherently revolt us. They reduce our visceral reaction to seeing the embodiment of these ideologies. Now, does this make us totally ignore the history that comes with them? No. But for some people, it moves them from the territory of revolting to just edgy. It makes scrawling a swastika on something change from unthinkable to just dangerous.
You're both right and you're wrong. You're right, I'm not revolted by a symbol or a uniform. The swastika or the Iron Cross does not revolt me. What revolts me is an ideology that preaches the existential cleansing of an entire people, the superiority of one over all others, the final solution, the Holocaust. Those revolt me. Not a uniform in a video game. You know, not some faction in a video game, not somebody making a joke about a faction in a video game. I'm not sensitive to pixels on a screen because those don't really have real-world consequences. You know what does? You know, events where political ideologies clash and people in the real world actually die. Things like Charlottesville actually occur. You know, where people who actually think unspeakable things do kill people, regardless. It's not a uniform, especially in a video game. And by the way, it's ironic that you point to the Iron Cross and you don't even explain the history behind that Iron Cross. And the Iron Cross that you're showing isn't even the racist form of the Iron Cross, the one that you're actually trying to denounce. The Iron Cross that you're showing is actually the non-Nazi form of the Iron Cross, the one that is actually from, you know, the pre-Reich. This is actually a medal, a German military medal that dates back to the 19th century. This was used during the Kingdom of Prussia. It was actually established by King Frederick William III in 1813 during the Napoleonic Wars. Only during the 1930s, when the Nazi regime put the swastika on it, did it become a quote-unquote Nazi symbol. That is some extra credits for you, because they couldn't even do that during their animation.
It means you might not take iron crosses all over a website as a warning sign that you should immediately leave. And if you don't leave, you might start reading and buying into hateful ideas there.
Well, if that's the case, I really hope those Nazis don't start putting pictures of Mario all over their websites, because I played a lot of Mario too, and I'm pretty normalized to him now. If I start seeing a lot of pictures of him on those hateful websites, I might start reading a lot of those intolerable ideas and principles. I just won't be able to distinguish between the real world and their immoral principles. Those darned video games and their normalization are at it again, folks. See, that just doesn't sound right, does it?
By the time you've played 100 hours of being a Nazi, their voice stabs become memes and in-jokes with your friends. By the 1000th time you've respawned as a terrorist, you're either celebrating them or making fun of them. Neither of which helps the global crisis we have that takes thousands of lives every year.
What does it matter what people joke about, honestly? I mean, are you the joke police now? If 3 people in a Discord call are privately joking about how some stupid Nazi figure in a video game, how he sounds, how harmful is that really? According to you, that must mean they'll be marching down the road in the full SS gear tomorrow, right? And I mean, let's keep it $1.50 here. It isn't my place in this world to help the global terrorism crisis. I'm fully aware that terrorism exists in the world. It's a shame. You know, if I could do something, I would. But what am I going to do? Stop making jokes about it and suddenly it's all going to end? ISIS is going to be like, well, you know, that Optimus guy on YouTube promised he'd stop making CSGO jokes, and, you know, now we're officially going to cease operations. It's been a good however many years, but it's over, folks. If I wanted to stop it, I would have went through and joined the military. But I didn't, because I like sitting around and making YouTube videos all day and playing video games. And by the way, nobody is celebrating terrorism when they respawn in a video game. The fact that you would even say that is absolutely beyond me. I can almost assume, based off this alone, that you do not understand gaming whatsoever. Please let me know how many times any of you watching this video have openly celebrated terrorism because you've respawned in a video game. I would love to know.
So what do? That's easy. Don't make them morally equivalent. Don't make there be no in-game moral difference between your Nazis and your allies, between your terrorists and your counter-terrorist squads. Frame PvP as a training exercise, Or simply take one of your non-odious sides and recolor them so that it's red versus blue, rather than Axis versus Allies.
Yeah, because we don't need any sort of historical context beside the sides and the games that pertain to the real world. You know, when I'm playing a game about World War II, I prefer for the factions to be called red versus blue. Not because that makes sense, but because people are apparently offended because, you know, this is somehow normalizing Nazism, even though it really isn't.
And if you decide that you need to have both sides be playable, don't make them interchangeable. Don't have players randomly spawn in as one or the other. Allow players to choose which side they're on. Now, of course, this has all sorts of in-game problems, such as creating shorter wait times for fascists, but you know what? Those wait times could be artificially extended if it meant players had an active choice in what teams they would represent if you're saying we need people playing Nazis in our games.
Thank you for finally admitting that you do not understand video games. Yeah, we'll just artificially extend those queue times and allow everyone to choose sides so that once a side is filled and can no longer accept players, we'll create an artificial backlog of players that didn't need to be there and just punish every person trying to play the game. Yeah, that sounds great. That's great. Perfect idea.
And if you're going to say, but we need it for historical reasons, then your game better actually be historical. You can't really just hide behind the fact you called your desert map El Alamein and say, but it's historical. If that were the case, you need your PvP to at least represent real historical events and be a realistic take on those battles. Once you make both sides balanced, it's also no longer historical. And you can't really say that you need Nazis anymore for historical accuracy.
Why exactly can't you? Who are you to tell these developers that they can or can't do that? I mean, it's great that they can just police these developers into this historical accuracy, but at the same time, they can't even understand the Iron Cross's history and they fail to understand basic video game fundamentals. If a game development team wants to name a map El Alamein and they want to make Nazis fight there, I don't have a problem with that personally. Video games are an art platform for video game developers to do whatever they please with, and it's not up to me to demand that they do or don't do something in it until the product is released. Then the decision it's made by me purchasing that product or not doing so. Just like with Battlefield 5, I was fully into buying the game until I realized that the game was fully politicized to please a bunch of people who don't play the game by putting a bunch of people in the game who weren't in the actual fight at the expense of the core fan base of the game. So they officially responded in the comments section with a couple of counterpoints to some of the criticism that they received because this was a very controversial video, and I do want to go ahead and respond to these points as well. Number one is, we never said that playing as a Nazi turns you into a Nazi. That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works. However, there's plenty of research about how art and media can shift people's perspectives. This isn't a good or bad thing. It's just a natural effective culture. Please look up the Overton window, or heck, you can watch our video on propaganda games. So no, playing a Nazi doesn't magically transform you into a Nazi. Nobody ever said that. You never said that playing as a Nazi turns you into a Nazi, but you did literally say that respawning 1,000 times as a terrorist in a game makes you celebrate terrorism and joke about it with your friends. That is a verbatim quote, which, by the way, it doesn't for everyone. You're just generalizing people when you say that, but you go ahead. So, playing as a Nazi doesn't make you a Nazi, but playing as a terrorist makes you celebrate terrorism. Number two, we never said that games should never let you play as Nazis or terrorists for that matter. If you need the exact timestamp, they provided it. There's a lot of potential for some really interesting or impactful games that put the players in the boots of people in control of systems that have done incredible harm. But it can't be done thoughtlessly or just to skin on top of mechanics devoid of context. I mean, this is true. They didn't ever say that. And realistically, should it be done in a proper way? Of course. But does it have to be done in a way that these people see fit to qualify? No, it doesn't. As long as the general consumer base is fine with it, I mean, generally speaking, I'd say that's pretty much okay. That's where a game like Battlefield 5 failed. I mean, it just didn't sell as well. It didn't. I mean, that's just facts. Number three, for those saying it's just a game and we shouldn't think too hard about it, I feel like perhaps it might be important to introduce ourselves. Hi, we're Extra Credits. Our tagline for a very long time was, because games matter. It's something we fundamentally believe, and if you don't, that's okay. But then our content might not be for you because thinking hard about games is kind of our shtick. You can fundamentally believe that video games matter and that video games can be an art form used to express all sorts of things. This is something that I think many of us can agree upon. You can also fundamentally believe that a video game using Nazis in it is simply just using Nazis in it, and that's basically it. Nothing more, nothing less. I've never picked up Call of Duty World War II and played for a few hours, and next thing you know, just because I was playing as a Nazi, I was thinking it was okay to throw up the flat hand on a horizontal plane. A video game can be whatever you make of it. It can be high art, it can be something to pass the time, or anything in between. If you're going to fundamentally look too deep into a non-issue, though, at least look into one that doesn't pin blame against an entire group of people for doing nothing wrong and claim that they're normalizing a dangerous mentality, though. Number 4, our writing staff is the same, and we've always talked about politics and games in our other videos. If this comes as a surprise, or that you think there's been a large shift in our thinking, I'd invite you to take a look at some of our older episodes. We live in a time where neo-Nazis exist, and they've seemed to have increasingly found a home in gaming communities. This isn't something we can turn a blind eye into anymore, and it's important to consider what we as game designers can do to try and make things better. Now, I don't know anything about their staffing, I won't pretend to. However, they say we live in a time where the neo-Nazis exist and whatnot, and they found a home in gaming communities. Now, I don't think neo-Nazis necessarily have found a home in gaming communities specifically. I think, like many other radical ideologies that aren't popular in society, they have taken a stand on the internet because, well, for one, they can remain relatively anonymous. I mean, it's easy to sprout hateful ideas and ideas that society doesn't necessarily deem okay when you can hide behind a computer screen and a keyboard. If you go outside and say some of these things that they say, you run the risk of being punched in the face. That doesn't really happen on the internet. Second, there's dedicated spaces on the internet for these people to congregate. These types of places are not really common in the real world. You don't have a neo-Nazi coffee shop on every street corner to walk in and talk about things. You know, anyone can easily see that most people playing video games are not neo-Nazis. I mean, they simply have apparently gotten the stigma of being part of the gaming community. I mean, they're constantly online. A lot of them are playing games. But the reality is the majority of Americans are playing games now. You can make this point about a lot of communities. It's just, that's the truth. I think realistically it's more of a correlation, if anything. These people are still a very clear vocal minority in the gaming scene regardless. People will point to the video being dislike bombed and say, well, gamers didn't like that. And you're right. You know, we don't like being blamed for real world problems when all we want to do is play some video games. I would say that 99.9% of people who play these games simply don't care about whether or not they get put on a side that apparently represents a historically wrong side, you know? It's just something I don't think too deeply about because I'm quite aware I'm playing a video game. I don't sit there and think about, well, I'm playing as the Nazis, so, well, I think I'm gonna read up on some Nazi propaganda today. Am I the only one who feels this way? I think that's just how most people feel personally. I mean, let's be really honest here. Just think about it. You know, if the consumer doesn't like how a game portrays the history of a war that the game is representing, the consumer does not have to buy it. You know, I've thrown Battlefield 5 in your face plenty here, but I mean, just take a look at it. The game didn't sell well. I've said that plenty, I know. I apologize for it, but I mean, it's a great example. Very recent, one of the biggest examples here. World War II, they threw this one all through this video, but consumers don't mind if Nazis or terrorists are in games, as shown plenty of times throughout gaming history. The games sell fine. People play them, and guess what? The world keeps right on turning. Hitler V2 hasn't sprung up yet, and at the end of the day, if someone feels uncomfortable playing as one of these factions and doesn't want to play, they shouldn't be purchasing the game that revolves around playing as these types of people. Instead of throwing self-accountability out of the window, how about we allow consumers to make decisions for themselves instead of changing what developers can and cannot do? Because frankly, I don't care. If the game looks fun, it doesn't have that many catches, and it's reasonable, I'm probably gonna play it anyways. I don't play video games to ponder the real-world politics of our society unless that's what the game is designed to do. I don't play a World War II game to think about neo-Nazis in 2019. I don't play Counter-Strike to think about how 9/11 impacted society. Most people don't. Thank you for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're brand new, follow me over on Twitter at Optimus. I post memes, thoughts, and updates over there. Surefire way to get notifications of all my newest content. Join the Discord down below. Lots of great things going on down there as well. Thank you to my channel members for your $5 a month. Your support helps my channel tremendously. And until my next video, guys, this is Optimus normalizing all the bad guys, and I'm signing out.